The hidden language of manipulation. How questions become weapons. In the intricate dance of human communication, questions serve as bridges between minds, tools for understanding, and pathways to truth. Yet lurking beneath the surface of seemingly innocent inquiries lies a darker purpose. Questions designed not to illuminate but to obscure, not to understand but to control. These are the weapons of psychological manipulation, wielded by those who have mastered the art of twisting language into chains of confusion and self-doubt. The human psyche is remarkably susceptible to certain forms of verbal manipulation, particularly when these manipulations come disguised as simple questions. What makes these tactics so insidious is their appearance of reasonableness. They sound like normal conversation, like genuine curiosity, like the natural flow of dialogue between two people trying to understand each other. But beneath this veneer of normalcy lies a calculated strategy to undermine your confidence, question your reality, and ultimately gain control over your thoughts and actions. The ancient Stoic philosophers understood this phenomenon intimately. They recognized that the human mind could be either a fortress of clarity or a playground for manipulators, depending on how well it was trained to recognize and resist deception. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his personal journal that would later become known as Meditations, constantly reminded himself to examine not just what people said, but why they said it and what they hoped to achieve. Seneca, another towering figure of Stoic philosophy, taught that we suffer more from our imagination than from reality itself, a principle that manipulators exploit with ruthless efficiency. The first and perhaps most damaging of these manipulative questions is the classic "Why are you being so sensitive?" This seemingly simple inquiry carries within it a psychological payload designed to detonate your self-confidence. When someone asks this question, they are not genuinely curious about your emotional state. Instead, they are launching what could be called a gaslight grenade, an attack on your perception of reality disguised as concern for your well-being. The mechanics of this manipulation are devastatingly effective. By framing your reaction as excessive sensitivity, the questioner accomplishes several things simultaneously. First, they invalidate your emotional response without having to address whatever caused it. Second, they shift the focus from their behavior to your reaction, making you the problem rather than addressing the problem itself. Third, they plant a seed of self-doubt that can grow into chronic second-guessing of your own instincts and perceptions. What makes this tactic particularly cruel is how it weaponizes one of humanity's greatest strengths, our capacity for empathy and emotional awareness. Sensitivity, far from being a weakness, is actually a sophisticated early warning system. Those who feel deeply and notice subtle changes in behavior, tone, and intention are often the first to detect when something is amiss. They are the canaries in the coal mine of human relationships, alerting others to danger before it becomes obvious to everyone else. The person who asks, "Why are you being so sensitive?" understands this dynamic perfectly. They know that sensitive individuals are threats to their manipulative agenda, because these individuals are likely to notice inconsistencies, detect lies, and call attention to problematic behavior. By attacking their target's sensitivity, they hope to dull this natural defense mechanism, creating confusion where there should be clarity. The appropriate response to such a question requires understanding its true nature. This is not a request for information. It is an accusation disguised as inquiry. The most effective counter is often to redirect the conversation back to the actual issue at hand. A calm response such as, "I'm not being sensitive, I'm being observant. Are you uncomfortable with that?" serves multiple purposes. It refuses to accept the false premise, redirects attention to the questioner's discomfort, and maintains emotional equilibrium while doing so. The second weapon in the manipulator's arsenal is the seemingly innocent, "You trust me, right?" This question appears to be about reassurance, about strengthening the bond between two people. In reality, it is a demand for blind faith that circumvents critical thinking and rational evaluation. When someone asks this question, they are not seeking to build trust through demonstrated reliability and consistency. Instead, they are attempting to extract trust as a commodity, Demanding it is payment for continued relationship. Genuine trust is never demanded. It is earned through consistent actions over time. A trustworthy person demonstrates their reliability through their behavior, creating a track record that speaks louder than any words. They welcome questions, encourage scrutiny, and remain transparent about their motivations and actions. In contrast, someone who demands trust is often trying to short-circuit the natural process of trust building because they know their actions will not withstand careful examination. The question, "You trust me, right?" carries within it an implicit threat. It suggests that questioning or doubting is a betrayal of the relationship, that skepticism is somehow wrong or hurtful. This creates a false dichotomy where the target must choose between maintaining the relationship and maintaining their critical thinking abilities. The manipulator hopes their target will choose the relationship, thereby surrendering their ability to evaluate and judge independently. Epictetus, one of the most practical of the Stoic philosophers, taught that it is impossible for a person to learn what they think they already know. This principle applies perfectly to the trust manipulation. When someone demands trust rather than earning it, they are asking their target to stop learning, to stop gathering information, to stop evaluating their behavior. They want to close the door on inquiry and investigation because they know that continued observation will reveal inconsistencies and deceptions. The Stoic response to such a demand involves what the ancient philosophers called apatheia, not apathy in the modern sense, but a calm detachment that allows for clear observation without emotional turbulence. When faced with, "You trust me, right?" the aware individual slows down, takes a breath, and responds with something like, "Trust is earned through consistency. Are you asking me to ignore my judgment?" This response acknowledges the request while refusing to comply with its implicit demand for unthinking compliance. The third manipulative question, "Are you accusing me of something?" represents a masterful deflection technique that transforms the questioner from suspect to victim in a single stroke. This maneuver is particularly effective because it exploits social conditioning about politeness and the avoidance of conflict. Most people are raised to avoid direct confrontation and to soften their language when expressing concerns or doubts. The manipulator exploits this conditioning by framing any questioning or curiosity as aggression. When someone responds to reasonable inquiry with, "Are you accusing me of something?" they are attempting to flip the entire dynamic of the conversation. Suddenly, the person who was asking legitimate questions finds themselves in the position of having to defend their right to seek information. The focus shifts from the potential problem or inconsistency to the supposed wrongness of noticing it. This reversal is so disorienting that many people immediately begin apologizing and backpedaling, exactly as the manipulator intended. The psychological mechanism at work here involves triggering what could be called accusation anxiety, the fear of being seen as harsh, judgmental, or confrontational. Most people want to be perceived as fair, reasonable, and kind. The suggestion that they are making accusations threatens this self-image and can cause them to retreat from legitimate concerns to avoid seeming unreasonable. The skilled manipulator understands that this question will likely throw their target into what might be called panic mode, a state of heightened stress where clear thinking becomes difficult and the primary goal becomes defusing the apparent conflict. In this state, people often abandon their original concerns and focus instead on reassuring the manipulator that they mean no harm, that they are not making accusations, that they are sorry for any misunderstanding. The Stoic approach to this manipulation involves recognizing it for what it is, a test of strength and resolve. The question, "Are you accusing me of something?" does not deserve a direct yes or no answer because it is based on a false premise. It assumes that asking questions or expressing concerns is equivalent to making accusations, which is simply not true. Instead, the question deserves what the Stoics called strategic silence, a pause that allows for careful consideration of the appropriate response. An effective counter to this manipulation might be to maintain eye contact, pause for several seconds, and then respond with, "Should I be?" This response is powerful because it refuses to accept the false premise, while simultaneously turning the question back on the manipulator. It demonstrates strength rather than defensiveness and forces the manipulator to confront the implications of their own behavior rather than successfully deflecting attention away from it. The fourth weapon in the manipulator's arsenal is perhaps the most insidious. Would I ever lie to you? This question is psychological theater at its finest, a performance designed to create an impression of wounded innocence and moral superiority. The person asking this question wants to be seen as someone who is above deception, someone so trustworthy and noble that the very suggestion of dishonesty is shocking and hurtful. The timing of this question is crucial to understanding its manipulative nature. It typically emerges when the target is getting close to uncovering something significant, when their questions are becoming more pointed, when their observations are becoming more accurate. Rather than address these concerns directly, the manipulator attempts to short-circuit the investigation by appealing to their supposed character and past behavior. The question serves multiple manipulative purposes simultaneously. First, it attempts to make the target feel guilty for doubting someone who claims to care about them. Second, it tries to establish the manipulator as someone who is incapable of deception, creating a kind of moral authority that should make further questioning unnecessary. Third, it invites the target to speculate about the manipulator's character, rather than focusing on specific behaviors and evidence. This last point is particularly important because speculation is the enemy of clear observation. When people begin speculating about someone's intentions, character, or capacity for deception, they move away from the concrete and observable into the realm of imagination and assumption. The Stoics understood this danger and consistently emphasized the importance of dealing with facts rather than interpretations, with actions rather than supposed motivations. The question, "Would I ever lie to you?" is designed to move the conversation away from specific, observable behaviors toward general character assessments and emotional appeals. It asks the target to ignore what they can see and measure in favor of what they are told to believe about the questioner's nature. This shift from observation to speculation is exactly what the manipulator needs to maintain their deception. An effective response to this manipulation involves refusing to engage with the false premise while redirecting attention back to observable reality. Instead of answering whether the person would lie, a response like "That's not the question. The question is, would I know if you did?" serves multiple purposes. It refuses to speculate about character, focuses attention on concrete evidence and observation, and forces the manipulator to confront the fact that their deception may be detectable. The fifth and final weapon commonly employed by manipulators is the exhaustion tactic. Can't we just move on from this? This question appears to be about resolution and healing, about putting difficulties behind and moving forward together. In reality, it is an attempt to avoid accountability by exploiting emotional fatigue and the natural human desire for peace and harmony. The timing of this question is predictable. It emerges when the manipulator realizes that continued discussion or investigation is likely to expose their deception or wrongdoing. Rather than address the underlying issues, they attempt to create a false choice between continued conflict and moving forward. They frame persistence as stubbornness, thoroughness as obsession, and the desire for resolution as an inability to let go. This tactic is particularly effective because it exploits legitimate desires for peace and progress. Most people do want to move beyond conflict and difficulty. They want relationships to be harmonious and interactions to be pleasant. The manipulator understands this and frames their desire to avoid accountability as a shared goal of restoring harmony and moving forward together. The emotional manipulation involved in this tactic is sophisticated. By suggesting that continued discussion is unnecessary or even harmful, the manipulator attempts to make their target feel guilty for not being ready to move on. They may suggest that holding on to concerns is unhealthy, that continuing to seek answers is obsessive, that the inability to forget and forgive is a character flaw. Marcus Aurelius provided guidance that applies perfectly to this situation when he wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." The manipulator who asks, "Can't we just move on?" is essentially asking their target to act as if something wrong was right, to pretend that something untrue was true. They want resolution without responsibility, peace without justice, harmony without honesty. The key to recognizing this manipulation lies in understanding the difference between genuine resolution and mere avoidance. True resolution involves understanding what happened, why it happened, and what will prevent it from happening again. It requires acknowledgement of harm, taking of responsibility, and demonstration of changed behavior. Avoidance, disguised as moving on, requires none of these things. It simply asks everyone to pretend the problem never existed. A principled response to this manipulation might be something like, "I'll move on when I understand what happened, not before." This response establishes that the desire for peace is genuine, but not at the expense of truth and understanding. It communicates that resolution is welcome but must be real rather than superficial. Understanding these 5 manipulative questions is crucial, but recognizing them is only the beginning. The deeper challenge lies in understanding why they work and how to build psychological immunity against them. The effectiveness of these tactics relies on several common human vulnerabilities that manipulators learn to exploit with ruthless efficiency. The first vulnerability is the desire to be seen as reasonable and fair. Most people have been socialized to avoid conflict, to give others the benefit of the doubt, and to maintain harmonious relationships whenever possible. These are generally positive traits that contribute to healthy social functioning. However, manipulators understand how to weaponize these traits, using them to prevent their targets from asking hard questions or maintaining firm boundaries. The second vulnerability is the tendency to doubt oneself when faced with confident assertions from others. This self-doubt is often the result of past experiences where authority figures discouraged questioning or independent thinking. Many people carry within them a voice that says they might be wrong, they might be overreacting, they might be seeing problems that do not really exist. Manipulators are skilled at activating this inner voice and using it to undermine their target's confidence in their own perceptions. The third vulnerability is the desire to maintain important relationships, even when those relationships have become unhealthy or harmful. The fear of loss, abandonment, or social isolation can make people willing to sacrifice their own clarity and well-being to preserve connections with others. Manipulators exploit this fear by creating situations where their targets must choose between maintaining the relationship and maintaining their integrity. The fourth vulnerability is the tendency to believe that conflict and difficulty in relationships are always the result of misunderstanding rather than genuine incompatibility or harmful behavior. This belief, while sometimes accurate, can prevent people from recognizing when someone is deliberately causing harm or pursuing their own interests at others' expense. Building immunity against these manipulative tactics requires developing what the Stoics called philosophical armor, a set of mental practices and principles that protect against psychological manipulation. This armor consists of several key components, each designed to strengthen a particular aspect of mental resilience. The first component is the cultivation of what Epictetus called the discipline of desire, the ability to want what you have, rather than having what you want. In the context of manipulation resistance, this means being willing to lose relationships, opportunities, or social approval, rather than compromise your integrity or clarity. When you are not desperately attached to specific outcomes, you become much more difficult to manipulate because manipulators cannot threaten you with losses that you are not afraid to face. The second component is the development of emotional regulation skills that allow you to remain calm and clear thinking, even when under pressure. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about the importance of maintaining inner tranquility regardless of external circumstances. When you can remain emotionally stable while being questioned, pressured, or accused, you are able to think clearly and respond strategically rather than reactively. The third component is the commitment to truth over comfort. Many people are willing to accept convenient lies rather than face uncomfortable truths. This preference for comfort over accuracy makes them vulnerable to manipulation because manipulators often offer appealing explanations and reassurances that feel better than harsh realities. The Stoic commitment to seeing things as they really are, regardless of how unpleasant that might be, provides protection against this vulnerability. The fourth component is the development of what might be called question immunity, the ability to respond to manipulative questions without being derailed by them. This requires understanding that not all questions deserve direct answers, that some questions are really statements in disguise, and that the most powerful response to manipulation is often a well-crafted question in return. The practice of developing this immunity involves regular mental exercises designed to strengthen psychological resilience. One such exercise is what could be called the fire drill of truth, a systematic mental check that can be performed whenever something feels off in an interaction. This drill involves asking several key questions. Is this person seeking truth or control? Am I being guilted into silence? Would I consider this behavior acceptable if I witnessed it happening to someone I care about? What happens if I don't comply with what is being asked of me? Who becomes uncomfortable when I ask direct questions? These questions serve as a kind of psychological diagnostic tool, helping to identify manipulation attempts before they can be fully deployed. The effectiveness of this approach lies in its focus on patterns rather than isolated incidents, on behavior rather than explanations, on evidence rather than assurances. Another crucial practice is the development of what Seneca called negative visualization, the practice of imagining loss or difficulty in order to build emotional resilience. In the context of manipulation resistance, this means regularly considering what you would do if you had to end relationships, face disapproval, or deal with conflict in order to maintain your integrity. By mentally rehearsing these scenarios, you build confidence in your ability to handle them, which makes you less susceptible to threats and pressure. The cultivation of intellectual humility also serves as protection against manipulation. People who are confident in their ability to learn and adapt are less likely to cling to beliefs or relationships that no longer serve them. They are more willing to acknowledge when they have been deceived or when they need to change course. This flexibility, paradoxically, makes them stronger and more difficult to manipulate because they are not invested in being right about everything. The practice of regular self-examination, another Stoic discipline, helps build awareness of your own vulnerabilities and blind spots. Marcus Aurelius spent time each day reviewing his thoughts, reactions, and decisions, looking for areas where he could improve his judgment and response to events. This kind of honest self-assessment makes it easier to recognize when someone is trying to exploit your particular weaknesses or insecurities. Perhaps most importantly, the development of manipulation immunity requires building a strong sense of personal identity that is not dependent on others' approval or validation. When your sense of self-worth comes from internal sources, your values, your efforts, your growth, rather than external sources like others' opinions or treatment of you, you become much more difficult to manipulate. Manipulators rely on their target's insecurity and need for approval. When these vulnerabilities are not available for exploitation, their tactics lose much of their power. The application of these principles in daily life requires constant vigilance and practice. Manipulation is not always obvious or dramatic. It often occurs in subtle, incremental ways that can be difficult to detect until significant damage has been done. Learning to trust your instincts while also verifying them through careful observation is a delicate balance that improves with experience. One practical approach is to develop what might be called pattern recognition skills, the ability to notice when conversations or interactions follow predictable manipulative scripts. Most manipulators use similar tactics because these tactics are effective. By becoming familiar with common patterns, you can recognize them more quickly and respond more effectively. Another practical skill is learning to slow down conversations and interactions that feel pressured or urgent. Manipulators often try to create artificial time pressure to prevent their targets from thinking clearly or consulting with others. Taking time to process, reflect, and even seek outside perspective can be powerful antidotes to this pressure. The practice of documenting concerning interactions can also be valuable, both for your own clarity and for validation from trusted others. Writing down what was said, when it was said, and how it made you feel can help you identify patterns that might not be obvious in the moment. It can also help you maintain perspective when someone tries to convince you that your memory or interpretation of events is incorrect. Building a support network of people who share your commitment to honesty and clarity is another crucial element of manipulation immunity. Having relationships with people who will tell you the truth, even when it is uncomfortable, provides a valuable check on your own perceptions and judgments. These relationships also offer emotional support when you are dealing with manipulative people, helping you maintain your resolve and perspective. The long-term benefits of developing manipulation immunity extend far beyond simply avoiding deceptive people. The skills and perspectives that protect against manipulation also enhance overall life satisfaction and effectiveness. People who can think clearly under pressure, maintain their values in difficult situations, and build relationships based on mutual respect and honesty tend to be happier, more successful, and more fulfilled than those who are constantly navigating manipulative dynamics. The clarity that comes from refusing to participate in manipulative games allows for deeper, more authentic relationships with people who share similar values. When you stop accepting behavior that feels wrong or uncomfortable, you create space in your life for people and experiences that align with your authentic self. This alignment between values and actions creates a sense of integrity and wholeness that is both personally satisfying and socially attractive. The confidence that develops from successfully handling manipulation attempts spills over into other areas of life, making you more effective in professional settings, more assertive in advocating for yourself and others, and more resilient in the face of various challenges. The mental discipline required to maintain clarity in manipulative situations strengthens your overall cognitive abilities and emotional regulation skills. Perhaps most importantly, developing immunity to manipulation contributes to a broader social good. When more people refuse to participate in manipulative dynamics, these dynamics become less effective and less common. Each person who develops these skills and maintains these standards contributes to a cultural shift away from manipulation and toward more honest, respectful forms of communication. The ancient Stoics understood that individual character development was not just a personal matter but a social responsibility. They believed that becoming a better person, more honest, more courageous, more principled, contributed to the overall health of society. This perspective remains relevant today, as the prevalence of manipulation in personal, professional, and political contexts threatens the foundation of trust and cooperation that healthy communities require. The journey toward manipulation immunity is not always easy or comfortable. It requires facing difficult truths about some relationships and situations in your life. It may mean setting boundaries that others find uncomfortable or ending relationships that have become toxic. It requires developing comfort with conflict and disagreement, accepting that not everyone will like or approve of your standards and boundaries. However, the alternative, remaining vulnerable to manipulation and living in relationships and situations that require you to compromise your integrity, is ultimately much more costly. The stress of constantly doubting yourself, the exhaustion of navigating manipulative dynamics, and the corrosion of self-respect that comes from repeatedly accepting unacceptable behavior exact a tremendous toll on mental and physical health. Fire. 5 questions explored in this analysis. Why are you being so sensitive? You trust me, right? Are you accusing me of something? Would I ever lie to you? And can't we just move on from this? Represent just a sample of the manipulative tactics that people use to avoid accountability and maintain control over others. Understanding. These specific questions is valuable, but the deeper lesson lies in developing the ability to recognize the underlying patterns and motivations that drive all manipulative behavior.